by the time that actually that pot of money was sitting there, which is $160 million worth of it. In fact, it went up from there. So it was $160 million worth of ETH when they raised it. But then because the interest in the DAO meant that the price of ETH was going up very quickly, the value went up. So I think it's about $250 million worth of ETH was actually inside the DAO at the high point. I guess what we really explore in the film is how this was the moment where this first big crisis in Ethereum, where so much money has been taken, so much of other people's money has been taken. But it's also the genesis of this. I mean, this idea of code as law, which existed in the community, people have been talking about this idea, had its first kind of test, or its first way in which it melds with the realities of a hack, where people can argue, okay, this isn't necessarily a hack. It's not necessarily a bug in the code. It's just a feature of the code which somebody has taken advantage of. And then there's a real split in the community. This really, really, what I think is quite a beautiful, idealistic community that exists in that time in the early Ethereum days starts to be split between people that are saying the hackers should be allowed to keep their funds. What they've done is just using the code that was written. And other people saying, well, no, obviously real people are hurt by this. People's funds are being lost. This isn't right. We need to stop it. And there's that really interesting ideological schism there that's being caused by a hack being put into place.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic. Today's show features James Craig, the director of the documentary Code is Law. Normally we do a debrief and we share our impressions, our thoughts, our insights on different DeFi protocols. Today's show is the exception because we get to interview an incredible storyteller, the director, writer, producer behind this documentary, all on DeFi exploits. So we're going to just play the trailer, let you either watch it or listen to it. It tells the story better than we ever could, and we hope you enjoy it.
There is an absolute crime epidemic in the cryptocurrency space.
With crypto hacks, if you steal $1 million, it's a really small hack. You typically have tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars.
The DAO hack 8 years ago is like the real first origin of this.
The largest crowdfunded project that had ever existed.
The code creates the rules, and that's the law. And if you're able to manipulate that code, it's just one transaction and all the money is gone.
All I was looking at that moment was an attack that was the result of $12.5 million gone. It's terror heroin. In my gut, I knew, it's you, how do I prove it? The edit that user mTheoryLord had made 5 years prior to this was a name, Andejan Medjedovic. I thought, this isn't a teenager. There's no way this is a teenager.
It's weird to call someone an adversary, but I think that's probably quite close to what I'd call him.
The first time that a DeFi hacker is taken into the court of law to test whether code is law or whether law is law.
If a founder just calls the police when a hack occurs, they're just wasting valuable time. They call me in to get that money back. People think it's not really real because it's internet money or whatever, but this is real money. It's real theft, it's real criminals. It becomes catch me if you can.
Yeah, one thing, if this seems interesting to you, I think you should watch our podcast discussion here, but you should also go watch the movie. The movie's going to be coming out October 21st. It's going to be on Amazon Prime, Apple TV, YouTube, and I believe Vimeo. So lots of different places to watch it. But I think what we do is more of like a setup, tease, discussion about it. But definitely go watch the full-length movie when it comes out.
Both of us love the movie. I don't say that lightly. We don't often like movies about crypto. They tend to embellish the truth. They tend to paint this whole industry as a circus. I think they really took the time to understand this theme, code is law, and the origins of it with the DAO hack and what took place in 2020, 2021, 2022. Those were years where billions of dollars were being exploited from really early stage DeFi. So we're in a great place now to look back at all of that, more than 3 to 5 years later. And I think the movie is just an incredible retelling of real events that we experienced in this space. So just a quick reminder, you can subscribe at the-edge.xyz. That's the best place to stay updated on new podcasts and new posts through the Edge newsletter. You can go to our link tree at edge_pod. That's the best place to subscribe to the Edge podcast on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And then a quick shout out to all of our sponsors. They are the ones that make all this content possible. We have awesome sponsors like TOROS Finance and REDSTONE. And otherwise, we hope you enjoy the episode. Grow wealth exponentially. With TOROS leveraged tokens, when the market moves in your favor, your gains become parabolic. They're built to ride trends, auto-compounding profits. With TOROS, it's simple. Pick a vault, deposit, and your exposure is multiplied, maintained, and protected automatically against liquidations. TOROS reduces risk and keeps you in the market ready for the rebound. When markets dip, the vaults auto-adjust, softening losses and preserving your position. Just pick a token to multiply your returns. TOROS Finance, exponential gains with leveraged tokens. To learn more, go to toros.finance. REDSTONE is building the Oracle backbone to unlock real-world finance on-chain and next-gen DeFi. With modular gas-efficient feeds across over 110 chains, trusted by 170 clients, supporting over 1,300 assets, from value-accruing stablecoins, liquid staking and restaking tokens, to treasuries, private credit, and commodity tokens, REDSTONE delivers accurate real-time data where it matters most. The biggest platforms and protocols in DeFi today choose REDSTONE oracles, such as Athena, Securitize, BlackRock Biddle, Pendle, Spark, and Maple Finance. If you're building the future of finance on-chain, you need REDSTONE's leading modular blockchain oracle layer. To learn more, go to redstone.finance, and thanks to REDSTONE for supporting us here at the Edge podcast and Edge newsletter. Banks use your money to line the pockets of shareholders. Meanwhile, Solstice uses the same yield strategies to line your pockets. Introducing Yield Vault, Solana's best yield. A live delta neutral strategy with positive returns month over month for 3 years. Built for internet capital markets and powered by the stablecoin USX. To learn more, go to solstice.finance. FALCON Finance, the team behind the fastest growing synthetic dollar, with institutional yields that are competitive and sustainable, offering yield optimized across your favorite DeFi protocols. Point season is now live. Learn more at falcon.finance. NEUTRL is the next generation of crypto native yield. Their synthetic dollar NUSD taps into OTC arbitrage, funding rate inefficiencies, and delta neutral strategies to deliver premium, stable returns without taking market direction risk. NEUTRL is currently live in private beta and will be opening for public deposits soon. Learn more at neutral.fi. All right, let's introduce James Craig, director of the documentary Code is Law. James, welcome to the Edge podcast. How are you doing?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'm doing excellent. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. And we are so excited for more to learn about this documentary. I got to watch it. Nomadic got to watch it just about a week ago. It is so good. I was telling the guys before the podcast that I watched it on a Friday night. It was very late. I don't watch movies late anymore. I tend to go to sleep because I've got young kids and they keep us up in the middle of the night. And not only did I stay up late, but I woke up early at like 6 a.m. in a frenzy to finish the movie. I'd love to start with just more about the theme Code is Law. Give us the pitch on the movie Code is Law.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And I'm so glad to hear that you enjoyed it. Upon watching, that's really is a pleasure to hear. The movie is called Code is Law, and it's a documentary. I guess it's about the most important smart contract exploits in the history of crypto. So it kind of traces the lineage of this Code is Law idea, this Code is Law philosophy, by taking you inside some of the most historic smart contract hacks, and it kind of traces like how did this idea emerge, like what are the cases where people have used it to try and justify their actions, and it takes you right into the center of the drama by talking to like the developers, the investigators, the victims that actually live through these cases.
So James, maybe before we get further into Code is Law, I would love to get a bit about your background. Like, I'm curious what makes somebody like you interested in covering this stuff to begin with.
Yeah, sure. So my background is I'm an investigative journalist and television producer. So I've been making TV programs for UK television for a while now. Nothing to do with technology specifically. So I've been making programs about loads of different topics. I think the show, there's a couple of kind of big current affairs programs here in the UK. I think the equivalent in the States that some of your audience will be aware of is Frontline on PBS. So it's just like, a show which just covers loads of different kind of news topics. The whole time I've done shows about murder investigations, I've done shows about housing poverty, inflation, all kinds of topics across the years. But then a few years back, I was looking for topics to kind of branch out and make the kind of movie that I personally would enjoy watching at home. So the kind of movies that you'd see on Netflix, kind of thriller-style documentaries, the kind of thing I watch. And yeah, so I was on the lookout for a story, and that's then what led us to investigating this space. When a colleague of mine, we were looking for stories, and we came across the phenomenon of DeFi hacks.
By the way, you have no background then in crypto. Like, did you know anything about crypto, DeFi prior to this?
No, I literally knew nothing about crypto. Well, I knew what Bitcoin was, and I knew a little bit about Bitcoin. I'd had to explain it for a couple of other projects in the past on TV, little news pieces. But no, we purely came into it because so my fellow director on this, so there's two of us that directed the movie, and my fellow director Louis Giles, he had done a little bit of work in the space. So he made like branded videos, and he had made a short some tutorial videos for Aave. And so he was kind of in the space through that. And he was at a conference, I think it was ETHCC, maybe 2023. And he got talking to Michael Bentley, who's the founder of Euler Finance. And this was just after Euler had been hacked. And I think it's a $200 million hack. We actually talk about it a little bit in the movie. And so we'd been looking for stories to work on together. And so Louis mentioned this and said, like, there's this hack, $200 million. And he was like, actually, it's not like a rare occurrence. This is happening all the time. And then I was taking a look into it, and I remember going on Rect for the first time, like a site, a lot of your audience probably know it, the site which kind of logs DeFi hacks. And I remember like looking down the chart and seeing like 500 million, 200 million, $100 million. And this was all within, a year, 2 years. And I was, so obviously, I worked in a newsroom for years, and I was like, how is it that there are this scale of crime going on that nobody in the mainstream media is even aware of it? And that's what really drew me into crypto, because I was like, it's mad that there are things taking place on this scale, and I needed to understand, like, how is it possible for that to have happened? How is this working? And it was so at first I came to it initially because of the drama of seeing there are these, in my head I was like, okay, well, if there was a bank heist going on every week and $100 million was being stolen, it would be like the most important story in the world. So I was like kind of trying to figure out, why is it that that's not the case here? Like, what's going on? And then so I was looking into it, and I remember then that's when I first heard about the DAO hack. Was after I'd been researching it for a few months. And when I heard about the DAO hack and understood, so first of all, I started to understand what smart contracts were and the kind of ethos and idea behind smart contracts. And then I came to this understanding a little bit of what code is law meant. And then that's when my kind of interest really grew in it, because I was like, okay, this isn't just a simple story about crime and large amounts of money being stolen. There's this whole world of technology and culture and philosophy that underpins this, which was super engaging, super interesting, and that's what really kind of drew me into wanting to learn more about the space. And since then, so that was just the beginning, and since then I'm like fully focused now on doing stories just about cryptocurrency and hacking and cybercrime. Like, it's completely like captured my imagination now, and I love speaking to people in this space, and so that's really how I came into it.
Very cool. Well, why don't we just start there with the DAO hack, because that's sort of how this movie opens. And to DeFi Dad's point earlier, like, I knew about the DAO hack, but I didn't know about the intricacies of it. I didn't even know all the people who were involved in it. And this sets it up so well. I actually suggest, I don't know if we can just show this clip, a clip from the movie, just to kind of, tease this a little bit.
I thought we would get 30, and I was by far the most optimistic member of the team. We had $30 million within the first few days.
30 million, 50 million.
when it grew to that amount, I thought, oh my God, what am I part of here now?
I think 90 million was a point. I had a meeting in Berlin. I felt so uneasy about it. There were people there congratulating me. It was a huge success. I didn't feel like happy at all.
Christoph, when we raised $100 million, he actually physically vomited when he found out.
He got scared, just because we didn't expect those high numbers there.
Man, I was stoked. Oh my God, are you kidding me? It was a success out of my wildest dreams. I couldn't even believe that much money existed. At the time I was living in Seattle, just hunkering down there with some friends and paying like $300 in rent. And all of a sudden my project is raising $100 million.
Okay, James, set the scene here a little bit. To my knowledge, this was the biggest crowdfunding sale ever, but what were they even raising all this money for? Like, what was going on? Why did this big chunk of money end up in this pot, like all this ETH?
Yeah, that's right. Definitely at the time, it was the biggest crowdfunding raise that had ever been done. I think it was by a big margin at the time as well. And yeah, the story of how it came is super interesting. So it was... There was, I think we're talking about the really early days of Ethereum here, obviously, when there kind of not that many projects even existed on Ethereum at this point. And so Christoph Jent, one of the main characters of the film, and his brother Simon had started this company, Slockit. And the idea behind this company was, it was kind of like a decentralized Airbnb. It was like you could open, it was smart locks, which you could open by using Ethereum payments. So it's like a decentralized smart lock. And they had this idea, and he had, this gets mentioned in the film, they had tried to raise money for the start, but I think they wanted sort of a few million to run the company for a couple of years to start off, and they couldn't raise any money. They were going to venture firms, and nobody really understood at this point, like, why decentralized, like Christoph was saying to them, like, it means that it works without us. That's the point of decentralization, and all the people he was trying to raise money from just didn't understand at all why that would be advantageous for the customer. Whereas obviously the people who were already using Ethereum and understood cryptocurrency understood why decentralization would be appealing. So then they were trying to figure out a way to raise money from that ecosystem, from that community. And that's where the idea of the DAO originally came from. So initially it was a fundraising vehicle to raise money for Slockit to be able to run. So they started... That was the genesis of the idea. And I think it was at DevCon 1, Christoph pitched the idea. And there was like massive enthusiasm for the idea of a decentralized fund to raise money. And over the course of the period of time where they had pitched it, interest, I think they started a Slack page, and there was sort of 5,000 people on Slack really quickly. So this huge community of people that was super engaged with the idea formed very quickly. And as the community of people grew in size, the idea morphed into it not just being a vehicle to raise money for Slockit, but a vehicle that could exist as a pot of money for any new Ethereum project, any idea. So I think the idea kind of became, if you want to invest in the application layer of Ethereum, then you should invest in this fund, you should invest in the DAO. So it kind of morphed over time. And then once they actually started raising money, and they raised such a massive amount of money, that's when it really took hold, this idea that, like, okay, this isn't just for Slockit, because Slockit only wanted, I think Christoph mentioned something like 5 million is what they wanted in order to be able to run the company. But it was this huge. I mean, I think they raised, if I remember correctly, it was $4 million worth of ETH they raised just in the first day that the fund was open. So they like completely blew it out of the water, the amount of money they were hoping for. And it took on, what's really interesting is it kind of took on a life of its own. And with so many people that were engaged in the idea of raising money, lots of people had different ideas about actually what it would be. And I think, there's by the time that actually that pot of money was sitting there, which is $160 million worth of it. In fact, it went up from there. So it was $160 million worth of ETH when they raised it. But then because the interest in the DAO meant that the price of ETH was going up very quickly, the value went up. So I think it's about $250 million worth of ETH was actually inside the DAO at the high point. And then everyone was sitting on it, like, I think the founders didn't really ever expect it to do those kind of numbers. And like it said in that clip, Christoph especially, any of it. So Christoph and Lefteris Karapetsas, who's the developer who wrote a lot of the code, were absolutely terrified at that point, I think, because they had never imagined the code they'd written was going to be holding that amount of money. And they knew that once everyone says this in the movie, I think they all knew that once that amount of money was inside there, obviously because it was such a massive target then for an attacker, that there was going to be a problem because, nobody writes perfect code, and this was such a huge honeypot for somebody to try and attack.
This episode is brought to you by Mantle, pioneering a revolutionary new category called blockchain for banking by bridging TradFi and Web3 into one unified stack. With on-chain transactions, TradFi rail compatibility, and integrated DeFi features, Mantle is reshaping how financial services work. Their flagship app UR lets users hold fiat and crypto all in one Swiss-backed account, making real-world finance usable on-chain. To learn more, go to ur.app and follow Mantle_official on Twitter. Maple Finance is one of my favorite products in DeFi. It is a gateway to sustainable real yield powered by over $1 billion in AUM across USDC and BTC products. And now with SYRUPUSDC by Maple, anyone can earn institutional-grade yield. Learn more at syrup.fi, and thanks to Maple for supporting us here at the Edge Podcast and Edge Newsletter. If you can give us just a bit more about what happens after all this money gets raised. It's so exciting. It's the first real product that's to be launched on Ethereum. Everyone's excited. It's still a very small niche space of tinkers, not the types of founders that we see today with hundreds of billions of dollars. So what happens after all this money is raised?
Yeah, I think as soon as the money is in there, that's when the anxiety really starts to grow for the founders, I think, because Christoph speaks a lot to how much work he'd done, but I certainly wouldn't, I think he did everything humanly possible to try and make sure that code was as tight as it possibly could be. And so did the rest of the team. I think they realized with the amount of money that there was going to be a danger that people would be looking for vulnerabilities. And there's a lot of contention, I think, amongst that early community of people about the lead up to the point of the hack itself, because there's suggestions that some people had spotted the flaws that were the vulnerabilities that were there and maybe not made the team aware. There's also, from the team's perspective, I think they would look back and say, there was an idea pitched to have kind of security measures put in place in terms of extra people reviewing the code in the lead up to the hack and an investment that was suggested which the community didn't vote for. So there's a lot of contention about what maybe could have been done to protect it or to change the course of what happened. But I think it was only about 2 weeks after that this attack took place where. So at the point the attack starts, I think the value of ETH had the DAO somewhere between $150 and $200 million, and then so we talk about in the film, the first person to notice was Griff Green, who was the community manager of the DAO, whose job it was to kind of be the liaison between all the people that are in Slack and the Slockit team, and he was the first to realize that he gets up at 6 a.m. and he sees this hack taking place live. So this is one of the fascinating things about the DAO hack, is that it takes place over the course of a number of hours, and the team spot what's happening. I can't remember. I think somebody called Mo from the DAO community is actually the first person to spot what's happening and mention on Slack something's happening. There's money draining out of the DAO, and Griff Green sees what's happening and alerts the rest of the team. But so I think it's $15 million per hour was being drained from the DAO, and at that point, while it's happening live, they obviously don't know how this is happening, what the flaw in the code was to allow it to happen. They're just watching it happen. So they're having meetings over the course of hours where they're trying to figure out a plan to try and stem the flow, and literally they're watching the screen in real time. Millions and millions of dollars are flowing out, and it gets to around I think it's pretty much on $50 million that had been drained, and then the hack just stops, and I think still now nobody's certain about why that was that the hack actually stops. There's been a suggestion that there was a bug in the smart contract code of the hacker. Other people have suggested that it just stopped because the hacker thought they had more chance of getting away if they stopped with a certain point. But that's So then I think the moment it stops, about a third of what's in the DAO, about $50 million of people's money is taken out, and then it's Christoph who identifies that it's this type of. So it's one of the fascinating things is that. You could one of the reasons why people really wanted to invest in the DAO is that it was pitched that at any time you could take your money out, right? So you could put money in, but you could also then, if you decide you want to withdraw your investment, you could do that. And that's what it looks like is happening. The moment when Christoph discovers the hack is happening, he thinks it's just somebody withdrawing their money from the pot. And then he has this horrible moment where he realizes that they're withdrawing more money than they put into the pot, and realizes that then, okay, it must be a hack. But even the word, so this is, I guess, the really fascinating, what really drew me into this first when I first learned about the DAO. So even that word hack. So as somebody from outside the crypto space, you hear the word hack. That implies that there's some information being stolen or somebody using some kind of nefarious technique to infiltrate the software. And that's not what's happening with this. It's the logic of the contract code being set against itself. So it's commonly, referred to as a hack or an exploit, but other people would just say that the hacker is the hacker is just using the code as it was written. He has found out a way to withdraw more money than he put into the pot. And yeah, this is the I guess what we really explore in the film is how this was the moment where this first big crisis in Ethereum, where so much money has been taken, so much of other people's money has been taken, but it's also the genesis of this. I mean, this idea of code as law, which existed in the community, people have been talking about. This idea had its first kind of test, or its first way in which it melds with the realities of a hack, where people can argue, okay, this isn't necessarily a hack. It's not necessarily a bug in the code. It's just a feature of the code which somebody has taken advantage of. And then there's a real split in the community. This really, really, what I think is quite a beautiful idealistic community that exists in that time in the early Ethereum days starts to be split between people that are saying the hackers should be allowed to keep their funds. What they've done is just using the code that was written. And other people saying, well, no, obviously real people are hurt by this. People's funds are being lost. This isn't right. We need to stop it. And there's that really interesting ideological schism there that's being caused by a hack being put into place.
Yeah, one thing, as you were speaking there, when you were mentioning that the hacker stopped, I like just recalling how early days this was. There weren't a lot of crypto assets, right? There was Bitcoin, ETH, like maybe a small handful of a few others. So this hacker probably saw that they, whoever it was crashing the price of ETH, because this was like the biggest thing for Ethereum. And so there's probably a point of like diminishing returns, to be honest. They're like, hey, if I keep carrying out this hack, if I drive this thing to zero, like what's in this DAO, do I drive what I'm taking from the DAO to zero too? Like at what point do they have to say, like, if I keep taking money out and I keep crashing the price, like my money's actually not going up. It's actually going down still if I make this into a really bad situation. So I don't know.
At the time where they had taken out that money, it was 14% of all the ETH in existence that was inside the DAO. So it's a significant portion of the significant portion of the Ethereum, of the Ether that existed that was getting drained. Yeah.
Wow.
That's what I was wondering. What was the percentage there? So 14%, because I believe it's 3.6 million Ether. So today, I think the market cap, I'd have to double check here, 3.6 million. I'd have to double check what's the supply, but I assumed it's much less, just because over time with more blocks being produced, the ETH supply has grown, even with like certain forces reducing the supply over time. So anyways, long story short is today, Ether is around 500 billion in terms of its market cap. It represents a smaller portion of it, but yeah, I love your hypothesis, Nomadic, that by taking more, that person was ultimately putting what they hacked in jeopardy of failing. And I think there's a lot more history that you don't end up covering in the movie, because the movie, again, talks about other relatable stories to this code is law theme. But this is part of the origin story of Ethereum. It's been a criticism, I think, for many years that thankfully we've overcome, and the network is thriving, but it's just wild.
Yeah. So James, something else you brought up there is like, the title of the movie, this code is law. We saw that emerge, like you said, in the DAO hack, and that comes back again in a big way, I think, in these subsequent hacks that you portray in the film. So why don't you give us the high level setup for this next hack? It's the indexed finance hack. What's going on here?
Yeah, so the index finance hack is definitely what first really drew me into this story of DeFi hacks. And Lawrence Day, who was a technical contributor to Index Finance and is one of the kind of stars of the movie, was the first person who I contacted, involved with the DeFi protocol, who was willing to speak and tell his story in the film. So that really opened the door to telling this story. And the Index Finance hack is, I guess, what really stands out about it is it was the first time with this kind of smart contract exploit where the attacker was actually identified, actually unmasked. And so because of that, there's this huge dramatic story about the investigation and the chase and the uncovering of the identity of the perpetrator here. And also because the perpetrator was the first, because they were publicly out there talking about what they'd done, which is very rare in these cases. And they actually used this code as law defense. So they essentially used the idea that what they were doing was permissible because they were just using the smart contract code as it was written. That got me really interested in the case. And then with what I knew about the DAO, this was really the thematic link between these cases, which opened up the door to telling a story, which was like super engaging. So I think what's really interesting about Index is that the DAO is the kind of genesis of this code as law philosophy, but then there's this huge link between these two cases where Index is the first time where it actually plays out that a hacker is using this idea to defend their actions. So you've got, $16 million worth of assets being taken from a protocol, and for the first time the hacker's saying, actually, they're not just running away and disappearing, they're actually saying, what I did was justified, this should be allowed. And just like with the DAO, there's a huge community of people that on X out there that are supporting them and saying that they support the idea. So it's the kind of, I think it's the first time that this philosophy had found a figurehead to actually represent it is when the Index Finance hack occurred. And just for the kind of context so people understand what Index was and what happened. So Indexed is a protocol that exists. So it mimics index funds. So it's a way that you could buy a token which represents a whole basket of top. So you have, for example, a token which represents the top 10 crypto projects or the top 5 DeFi projects, and it gives you exposure to a kind of wide variety of assets. And they've been doing brilliantly. So that I think the protocol had been going. I can't remember exactly. Been going, I think, for about a year, and they had about 70 million in TVL at its high point. Doing an excellent job. Lawrence and Dylan Keller, who's the founder. And then they have the same experience as the DAO guys, which is like suddenly their phone exploding and realizing that money is being drained out the protocol, and they suffer, in that case, $16 million worth of losses.
This is probably a good time for us to play a clip from the movie. So we've got a clip that is Lawrence just talking about trying to play this catch me if you can game to identify who is the hacker behind Index Finance. So we'll go ahead and roll that clip.
Pull enough threads and the attacker will realize that the game is up and be coerced into returning funds. I was looking for this conversation with Umbral Upsilon, the guy who I had been speaking to, and I noticed that there's been a name change. The user is now known as Bogholder.
Someone saw the name Bogholder and recognized this person.
And they are associated with a different username. And that username was mTheoryLord.
We just searched for the username and looked for profiles on different websites, and we found one on Wikipedia that had posted some small changes to various Wikipedia pages.
And one of those was to a competition called Reach for the Top. It was a Canadian trivia show for high school students. The nature of this edit that had been made was that Reach for the Top has a section called Notable Alumni. It includes names like Stephen Harper, previous Prime Minister of Canada. And the edit that user mTheoryLord had made 5 years prior to this was a name. Andejan Medjedovic.
James, what else can you tell us about the alleged hacker Andejan behind Index Finance?
Yeah, so Andejan is, I guess, the first real example of a DeFi hacker who was caught and was proven by the founders to actually be the person responsible for doing a hack. So he was it's interesting that his identity wasn't out there during the course of their investigation, he was, through a Twitter account, he was kind of defending himself and using this kind of code is law idea. So there's this Twitter account, Zeta Zeros, where I think he was referring to it as having out-traded the index team. So they're aware of this kind of phantom presence that is justifying themselves well before the identity has come out. And they know straight away from the nature of the exploit that whoever did it is like an exceptionally talented individual, somebody who has a really incredible brain for mathematics and engineering. And then it comes out that it's this guy, Andy Imajedovic, and then a little later down the line, it comes out that he was only 18 years old where he does the hack. And I think that none of the team really thought before that came out that it would be possible for someone who was 18 years old to have done something like this. And they, it's well known that Andy is definitely a talented individual. So I think it's been reported I think he was 14 when he graduated from high school. He was taking kind of quite advanced maths when he was still in elementary school. He was, I think, in fact, he went to the same university that Vitalik went to, and I think that his one of his professors there said that they'd never known anybody go through the university as quickly as Andy went through. So he's definitely like a super talented kid. But we also know that he has some seemingly not so nice aspects of his guy. Well, that's an understatement, actually. There are strong indications that he's got kind of far right sympathies, possible that come up in the film. So there's a lot about Andy that are seemingly not to like. But I should always caveat when I'm talking about him that I think I have a lot of I want to caveat everything I'm saying by saying that when I was 18, I had a lot of things that I'm definitely not proud of. I have a degree of sympathy for while I definitely can see that he's done a lot of damage. I have a degree of sympathy when talking about especially this period of his life during Index because he was so young when he did it.
River is building a chain abstraction stablecoin system that connects assets, liquidity, and yield across multiple chains. Season 3 is live. Earn River points by using SAT-USD in DeFi such as Pendle, PancakeSwap, and Uniswap. Stake River points to accumulate more or convert points to River tokens whenever you like. To learn more, go to river.inc. Hey folks, I want to tell you about our sponsor Gearbox, the protocol that reimagines on-chain lending. With Gearbox, you can access 10x credit across DeFi or lend for passive yields with single asset deposits and no impermanent loss. Users can access leverage to margin trade, stake, farm, and more. To learn more about Gearbox, go to gearbox.fi. Puffer Institutional delivers secure, high-yield Ethereum staking built for institutions with battle-tested security, granular access controls, and the ability to boost APY by securing multiple AVSs. Puffer gives institutions full control and optimized returns. Puffer is also behind the Unify-based rollup, aiming to transform Ethereum's future in a world where all L2s are working together. To learn more, go to institutional.puffer.fi. I was struck by the fact that, someone that was so young was able to pull off such an enormous, call it heist. And in order to do that, there's a lot of math involved. It's not easy. These are not simple hacks. There's a reason that they pulled them off. There's a reason that billions of dollars were exploited between 2020 and I'll say 2022. That was really the worst part of it in my time in crypto. I think prior to this, we had hacks and exploits, but a lot of them had more to do with centralized exchanges. And in many cases, there was fault due to some centralized entity. Someone literally just stole the funds. Someone on the inside was running a fraudulent business. This was one where it plays into the title of the film, Code is Law. They use the code to be able to, extract funds, trick users. I've compared it to a tip jar. I was talking to Nomadic about this the other day, that when you go into a restaurant, a tip jar is I don't think, a great parallel for code in a DeFi app, but let's just, let's think about that tip jar as it holds funds that are to be distributed to the staff. Now, you could steal those funds at any point. You could take those funds. But if you were to take that money, I mean, it seems unethical. Like, it's not there for you to take. And I do think that there is something unethical about taking funds from smart contracts that are not yours. Like, I don't think they're playing a game better than others. I have a pretty clear conscience to say, they are intending to take funds that are not theirs and to, ultimately cause harm to others.
So I try and take people that have done this at their word. Right? I think, and someone like Andean, who was 18 when he did this indexed hack, I'm perfectly willing to believe that he may have believed himself that what he was doing was legal, and that he was evaluating the maths that underpinned this protocol, that he saw a flaw in it, had an understanding that it was possible for him to do this. He did it, he got all this money, and that maybe in his heart of hearts, he really did feel like what he'd done, he was able to justify it to himself that what he'd done was legal and that he shouldn't be punished for it and that he deserved the money that he'd taken. I'm willing to accept that when people do these, maybe that's how they feel. I want to take them at face value, but I think there's a whole separate question about is it desirable for those kind of activities to take place and there be no legal recourse for people who are losing funds, especially when people are losing. I mean, I think we say in the film the average amount of money that was across the wallets and index was $2,500. So you've got an awful lot of people that are losing like significant amounts of money. Just everyday people who have a little bit of money in crypto. So I mean, that's significant damage to a lot of people, and I think it's difficult to justify. Or as somebody who's coming from the outside, who's not necessarily got the ideological baggage of some people in the crypto space do, I think it's difficult to see how that could be justifiable. But that's not to say that someone like Andean, who did this when he was a really young guy, didn't believe that what he was doing was legal. And I think, in fact, the way in which it plays out with him defending himself both before and after his identity was made public suggests that he really did believe that what he'd done was legal up until the point where he goes on the run.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in a second. This gets even more interesting. But one other thing I want to call out, and I've seen it in, being in the crypto space for, I don't know, maybe it's been 8 years now, something like that. But in this space, archetypes like Andean can become idolized. And it's almost because they have this almost like godlike sense of competence in this like little niche. It's almost like, okay, like Michael Jordan, people respect him for being an incredible basketball player. I feel like, oddly enough, in the crypto space, there's people that like get this respect for these like almost superhero level hackers like this. It's same thing when you watch the movie Catch Me If You Can, you're cheering for the bad guy the whole movie. The guy that's like ripping everybody off, like, oh my God, it's Leo, he's killing it. That whole movie. So like same thing happens here. And I think there's a ton of sympathies. Like, it's not even just the 18-year-old kid thing. It's like almost like you're idolizing this like child prodigy archetype whiz kid thing, right? And you're falling into that a bit. And it's but again, this happens all the time in crypto. I think we're moving away from this, but some of these bad actors have been like propped up on a pedestal a lot in our industry. And I don't know if that's the same with other industries, but I don't know if you want to comment on that, James, but...
Yeah, I think that with the DAO hack, where there was a big portion of the community who were speaking in support of the hacker, I think things had changed by we're 5 years down the line with the index hack. And I think by that stage, as the industry had become, more commercialized, more professionalized, there was a lot more money in it. There was a lot more people in it. I think the vast majority of people by that point were thought that, when a hack happens, people are not on the side of the hacker. But I think one of the things about this case which drew a lot of people out and kind of resurfaced that movement, like in the film, I think Lefteris from the DAO talks about the idea that they'd kind of buried this ghost underneath the ground, and that when the index hack happens, it feels like it's re-emerging. This idea is re-emerging with Andean as its figurehead. I think this is the thing. I think people who had been in support of that idea, when they see Andean, they see him justifying what he'd done, they latch onto that as like a kind of hero of this movement. And he gets kind of lauded, both I think for his intelligence and the sophistication of what he'd done, but also the kind of confidence and the seeming kind of like, he comes across as this omnipotent character who's able to do this incredibly difficult thing and then kind of grandstand and say, like, no, what I've done is justifiable. I deserve to keep what I've done. It comes from my intellect that I've been able to do it and I deserve it. I think people really grip hold to that and they're compelled by that character. So yeah, I think this is the thing with Andy is that he's obviously an incredibly intelligent guy. I think there's always it's that being lauded, which he obviously was really keen on. I think it's his ego which is his downfall in so many ways. I mean, even like that you saw in that clip, if he hadn't have gone onto the internet years before, I think it was 5 years before the hack he'd done this. If he hadn't have gone onto the internet and edited a Wikipedia page to say that he was a NEUTRL mathematician connected to this high school trivia competition, reached for the top. If he hadn't done that, then he may well have got away with this. His identity may not have been out there. His ego in that sense was his downfall. And I actually, there's an irony at the heart of this, because I found out while I was making the film, because I was speaking to the people from Reach for the Top, and one of the people there had spoken to Andy Ian's coach his high school in Waterloo. His coach there who was coaching the Reach for the Top team. It said that Andy Ian actually hadn't even made the team for. So there's an A team and a B team apparently. Andy Ian hadn't even made the A team and was on the B team for Reach for the Top at school, and the A team hadn't even ever made it to the qualifiers or the national finals. So it's in a sense it wasn't even. It was a kind of half lie, really, of him to be putting himself as a notable alumni of this competition, and that this kind of strange half lie is what eventually brings him down and means he has to go on the run for years from his family. So, yeah, I think definitely his ego is what brings him down in these situations.
He resurfaces in another attack, and this, I guess, happened while you were making the movie. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this was the really crazy part of us of the filming process. When we'd started filming, it was, I think, 2 years after the Index hack, and he'd been on the run for 18 months or so, maybe a little bit more. And then it was when we were actually coming, so we'd been going around Europe filming with the guys from the DAO over the course of a couple of weeks, and I remember being on the ferry back and everyone was absolutely exhausted, and then we see this news coming through on Twitter that there'd been this hack of KyberSwap, and it was a much bigger hack, so 48 million, so about 3 times the size of the Index hack. And then over the course, I'm following the news about it, and then it comes out this suddenly Andy Ian is being linked to this hack as well. So there was, I think, $2 million worth of the stolen assets from the KyberSwap, the wallet used by the KyberSwap exploiter, had been transferred over to a wallet that had been used in the Index attack. So there was suddenly this really strong evidence linking Andy Ian to this new case. But at the same time, it seemed in a way, it seemed unbelievable that it could be Andy Ian, in the sense that if you had been able to do it a second time, still a much larger amount of money, would you really give yourself away by transferring money to that wallet, which you didn't need to do? So in some senses, we were kind of amazed, like, oh, okay, this must be Andy Ian. In another sense, there's another voice that's kind of saying, well, actually, is this somebody trying to lay a red herring to frame Andy Ian for this, when actually it was somebody else? Just because, why would somebody do that? Why would somebody give themselves away like that when it's such a massive crime? And it was only then, over the course of the next few months, as we were digging more into this and trying to establish who was responsible, that we were ourselves, our team, confident that it had been Andy Ian. And then it's seemingly been confirmed now. He's never admitted. So he's admitted to the Index hack. He's never admitted to the Kyber hack. But he's now been charged by the FBI. So it was only 6 months or so ago, right when we'd finished filming, that finally it was seemingly confirmed that it was Andy Ian, because he's been charged by the FBI now. So we're talking now almost 4 years he's been on the run. So initially he's on the run from the Canadian authorities because he's wanted, a warrant had been issued for his arrest in connection to the civil case in Canada connected to the Index hack. But then obviously the much bigger KyberSwap hack had got the attention of the authorities in the US as well, because by then we're talking, just over a year after the KyberSwap hack, he's charged by the FBI for both. So a total of $65 million that he's stolen across those two exploits. And then, he's wanted by the FBI, but they still haven't caught him. So the warrant's been out for his arrest under that FBI charge for 7 months now, and he's still not been caught. So he's still on the run.
One thing that I was hoping to find out in the movie is, what's happened to his family. So I'm just curious, did you do any research to see if there's ever been a public statement by Andy Ian's parents? Like, this all strikes me as really sad.
Yeah, so this is one of the parts of it that I find difficult to talk about, because I'm a dad myself, and I've got so my heart goes out to his whole family, but especially his parents. Like, it really breaks my heart, the thought that he was so young when he did this and they haven't seen him since it happened. That's horrible to think. And we do know a bit about that side of things, because so when Andean initially went on the run, it was discovered because the court had sent officials to his parents' house to try and to look for Andean, or they were actually trying to take custody of his devices, to try and take custody of the disputed assets at that time. And it was when they got to his house that his parents said, he's gone, he's left the house, he's taken his devices with him. And so the Index team's lawyer, Jason Gottlieb, who we mentioned in the film, we know from the court documents that he did speak to Andean's dad. And I think Andean's dad, I think the phrase he used was that he said that he believed that Andean hadn't done anything wrong, and I think he used the phrase he hadn't done anything wrong because there was a hole in the smart contracts, he said. So I think Andean had obviously explained to him from his perspective what had happened, that he'd discovered a problem with a flaw in these contracts, and that's how he was able to take the money, and that in essence he hadn't done anything wrong. So at that early stage, like I guess his dad is like most of us who come outside crypto, who wouldn't necessarily have understood the dynamics. He doesn't know the ins and outs of what's happening here, but you would trust your son if you're being told. And this is what I was saying earlier. I'm sure Andean really did at this point believe absolutely that what he'd done was fair and justifiable. So at that point, his dad had taken his son at his word, and that's all I know about what happened to the family, apart from in the indictment from the FBI earlier this year. They talk about Andean and a co-conspirator, so they don't name them, but they talk about a co-conspirator, another family member who's involved in helping Andean to launder the assets from the hacks. So there is a family member that's been involved. I don't know who that is at all. I wouldn't like to speculate. I know that Andean's got I know of his parents and his little brother that are around, but I don't know kind of in the last few years if they've ever seen him. I don't know anything about that. In a way, I hope they have, just because I hate the idea of a family being split apart like that. But yeah, I know that from the indictment that at least one of them is kind of being dragged into it, but I haven't been involved in the laundering of funds.
One thing we didn't mention, I'm just going to pause here, like just during the Kyber hack, there was some crazy messaging happening. I think it was over Etherscan. Like, I think he was like putting messages into Etherscan or something. But like that, some of those messages were crazy. Like he at one point try to take over the company and stuff, and he was talking directly to the CEO and the actual Kyber team.
In the very early days after the KyberSwap hack, the only evidence that we had linking Andean was, first of all, so this $2 million worth of assets that had been transferred. But then what also seemed like kind of strong circumstantial evidence was just the kind of level of bravado that the attacker was displaying. So, in most DeFi hacks, the attacker just disappears. If there is engagement with the protocol, it's usually only just to try and arrange for a bounty to be paid. There's not this kind of grandstanding. But in this case, there was, like, I remember that there was a message just very shortly after the hack where the attacker had sent it was like you said on Etherscan, kind of saying, our negotiations will begin once I've had a few hours to rest. So kind of like toying with the team and the victims. And then, once these negotiations got started, I remember he was building up that there was going to be this treaty that he was putting out there. And when this treaty finally got released, he was essentially he was saying that given that he'd stolen this amount of assets, that the protocol was now essentially worthless, and that given that, the best thing that they could do is to accept his, I guess it was kind of ransom demand, that they should give him control of the company. I remember him saying that he was going to buy out the executives of the company, he was going to double the salaries of all the employees, and then he would restore the value of the tokens. So he was essentially kind of holding them to ransom, suggesting that he could blackmail them to give him control of the Kyber company. And it was the first time that anything like this had happened. There's never been a negotiation of that kind where it seems like suggests an attacker who is really not just doing it for the money that they've stolen, or maybe not even principally doing it for the money that they're taking, but actually principally doing it for the level of sort of power and control the feeling of power and control they get from being able to do this and to toy with the founders like this. So that in those early stages, given this $2 million had also been sent over, it kind of a lot of people we were speaking to were saying it seems like the same person. It seems like a similar kind of character profile to what happened in the first hack, and that is how it played out. It was the same guy.
Before we wrap up, I think we need to touch on the Mango exploit. Tell us more about what you cover in the movie and what really stood out. What was unique about the Eisenberg case with the Mango Markets exploit?
Yeah, so this over the course of making the film, so it's a long process making a film like this. It's sort of over the course of 2 years that we made it, and while we were making it, this Eisenberg case, so it was December 2022 when he carries out this exploit. He drains about $110 million worth of assets from Mango Markets, and he is the first example of a hacker who comes out voluntarily and says that he has done it after it happened. So there's this, I'm sure in this space, lots of people will know about this famous tweet where he comes out and says that what he done was legal and that he just engaged in a highly profitable trading strategy. So it's not not hack, not an exploit, the highly legal trading strategy. And the reason why we felt we had to cover this in the movie was that this was as this, because so he's shortly after this. I think the attack happens October 2022, and he's arrested just a couple of months after that, December 2022. And in the the indictment, part of the evidence that's used against him is the fact that he's actually openly admitted and tweeted that he carried out this exploit. And so it was becoming clear while we were making the film that this was going to be the first time that a DeFi hacker had actually been pulled into a courtroom and was actually going to stand in front of a jury and try and use a form of the code as law defense. And yeah, that's exactly. So I should just cover this, that actually there was one other DeFi hacker who got pulled, a guy called Shakib Ahmed, who was accused of 2 hacks, who did get arrested about the same time. Oh, no, got arrested a little bit later, but he is the first person to actually been found guilty because he pled guilty. So he never went to trial. He pleads guilty quite quickly. He gets sentenced to, I think, 3 years. Whereas Abraham Eisenberg was the first guy who was actually going to be in a courtroom testing these ideas in a court for all, like seeing if it actually, how it plays out in front of a jury. He doesn't. So I've we've engaged with his legal team over the course of making this, and they're quite. It's not purely it's not simply him standing up and saying, code is law. What happens in a smart contract should be permissible because I'm using the smart contract as it's written. It's not simple and straightforward like that. There were lots of different elements to that offence, and he is initially found guilty at trial. So initially, there's 3 counts. 2 of them, I think it's commodities fraud, commodities manipulation, and wire fraud. And he's found guilty by the jury on all 3 counts, and that's April 2024. But then time goes on. He's never sentenced. And what happens is that his defense team appealed to the judge to have the verdict overturned, and it is successfully overturned. So before he ever gets sentenced, his verdict is overturned with two counts vacated, which essentially means they could sort of as if they didn't happen. But the most serious charge, which is the wire fraud charge, which was the most serious conviction, the wire fraud conviction, which is what would have given him the most prison time, is actually overturned by the judge. So the judge is essentially saying that because this happened within the terms of a smart contract, because it's a permissionless automatic piece of technology that doesn't have any terms and conditions explaining what is or isn't permissible while you use it. The contract is essentially, I guess, the terms and conditions. He says because that's the nature of the technology, it's not actually possible for the fraud legislation as it's written, so it gets slightly technical here, but I guess there's what's called a false representation, a material false representation, which is essentially sort of, a mistruth. There has to be a mistruth which you're using in order to profit. And that's really kind of how that wire fraud legislation works. But that doesn't really map onto what happened in this case because of the nature of a smart contract. So the judge overturns the conviction, and that is where we are now, legally speaking. So Abraham went up as the first person to test a type of code as law defense, and in the end he's successful. Even though he's found guilty at trial, the judge overturns his conviction, and that's where we are at the moment. The government are appealing, so it could change in the future, but as it stands, the first time that a DeFi hacker actually tested this defense, it ends up with them not facing prison time because of what they've done. And I think the ramifications of that for the space are still not clear at the moment, because nobody else since then has stood up. The appeal isn't taken place yet, hasn't been decided upon yet. No other DeFi hacker has been brought in. I mean, it would be fascinating to see now if Andean were to be arrested and to be brought into the US legal system, whether or not the Eisenberg case would have any bearing on that case. It's not clear. I mean, are the FBI going to pursue charges against other DeFi hackers, given that the first high-profile case fell apart before they could be sentenced? It's just not clear. So I think what that means for other DeFi hackers and whether or not they would be, more or less willing to carry out these kind of acts, given what happened to Eisenberg. It's still not clear at the moment.
It is a fascinating movie. It's very entertaining. I think it's a movie that you can share with your friends who are not into this space. But if they are, they're going to really appreciate it. I was really struck by the time and detail put into really understanding the space. You seem to like the folks. The characters in this movie are extremely relatable. I think you're seeing what's happening behind the scenes. I think the stories about Lawrence just being sick to his stomach with what was going on with Index, and hearing the reaction of the folks behind the DAO and finding out that they had raised that much money long before the hack actually took place. The timelines are wild to imagine all of that money being gone overnight. And for years, I've wanted to see more storytelling around this. I know the crypto space, for whatever reason, always is in the headlines for, I think, less positive news, until maybe just the last year. We're starting to see so much adoption from Wall Street and from really favor from the US government with stable coins. Now that people with more credibility in our society are actually praising DeFi, I'm less concerned about telling these stories, which are just absolutely wild, and I think they need to be told. And again, I think what you've done here is really remarkable storytelling. So we're just grateful to have you on. But otherwise, I think this is a great place, guys, for us to close out. So first, I want to remind our listeners that they should go to journeyman.tv/film/8785. That is the website link for Code is Law. They should follow Code is Law Film on X. James, do you have an X account as well that they can follow you for updates?
I do, yeah. I'm James Craig 1111 on X.
Thank you so much for taking the time to come on with us and tell your story, and just want to give you the final word.
Yeah, I thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to talk about it. Yeah, and I do just want to say in relation to the point you made before about the people who took part. I think there are really interesting legal, ethical questions which the film explores, and there's a lot of tension and drama in the film. But it's also, I think there are really quite moving human stories at the heart of this thing. A lot of the time, the founders, the developers, go through an awful lot of trauma with these cases of dealing with the pressure of having millions and millions worth of assets, in the balance, trying to protect user funds after they've been lost. I'm really, really, really grateful for them for having told their stories, which are often really difficult to tell. And you'll see in the film a lot of them are, do find it difficult to tell. And I hope it was it was a cathartic experience for them to be able to tell their stories. And I hope the film kind of honors them by doing the story justice. And I also just want to thank my other the co-director of the movie, Louis Giles, who's not here speaking about it, but was just an equal part in making it as I was. So it was just as much credit and was incredible to work with. So thanks to him for helping me tell the story as well. And I want to thank you guys for giving me the time to come on and tell people about it.
Oh, and most important, if you want to watch Code is Law, it will be streaming starting on October 21st. It'll be on Prime, Apple TV, and YouTube. Thanks everyone for tuning in. To stay up to date with future episodes, plus get expert tips, strategies, and exclusive content, subscribe to our free newsletter at the-edge.xyz.